We're going to talk about the difficulties in the culture of this, in the intent of what's going on behind these recommend interviews rather than the historicity of them. So we're not going to be talking about, how back in Joseph Smith's day, one of your questions would have been, have you stolen anybody's cow? Unpacking Mormonism and other religious trauma is meant for educational purposes only. Hello and welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm Sarah Westbrook, your host. My co-host is in the green room. Oh, there he is. Hey, sexy. There's Mason drinking his coffee this morning. And we're really excited to be here today to continue our series on the temple. Before we do that, I kind of wanted to talk to our audience about some of the things that are coming hopefully in 2024. So we are, as we talked about last week, we are starting the Brig Foundation. So we are in the very beginning stages of creating a nonprofit organization named after our son, Brigham, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was actually diagnosed with psychosis at the age of 4. So he has pediatric onset schizophrenia. And our goal is for this foundation to help pay for behavioral health and mental health interventions for individuals who are the struggling working class, who are either uninsured or underinsured in the United States of America. We are also starting a second nonprofit organization, the Daisy Girl Wellness Farm, where we will be offering equine therapy services and other clinics to help with teaching parents about behaviorally challenging children, groups for teens, groups for adults, groups for couples, for marriage. And we're going to do these in clinics. And again, that is going to be a nonprofit organization, and we're really excited for that. Ways that you can support us as we start. So we are not nonprofit yet. We are in the process of developing our nonprofit organization, which of course costs money. And so we've got the proceeds from the Daisy Girl store where you can buy Daisy Girl merch. So the things that are behind me, the proceeds from that will be going directly to helping us with the startup costs of both foundations and nonprofit organizations. And the other way is you can donate directly to the Daisy Girl Venmo account. And we will be working with an accountant to make sure that all of the donations that come into us are transparent. We will be posting that on our website so that you can see how your donations are being used. I want to make it abundantly clear that these donations do not go to keeping the podcast alive, that these donations are going to go directly to setting up the 504 nonprofit organizations of the Daisy Girl Wellness Farm and the Brig Foundation. The Daisy Girl Wellness Farm will be a local organization here in central Missouri, and we will be accepting clients from all over the nation for that. The Brig Foundation will be utilized as scholarships and grants that can be extended for patients no matter where they are located, after we check in and make sure that the treatments are evidence-based and that the client qualifies. So we're working on all of that. So please donate to these organizations. We really appreciate your support. Mason, do you have anything you wanted to add to any of that before we jump into today's podcast?
Negative.
All right.
Pattern is full.
Fantastic. So today we have invited Kayla and Jordan back into our show. So if you remember from, I think it's been about 8 weeks or so, we did an interview with them and talked about a mother in heaven or a female divine. And we got a lot of positive feedback from that. It is one of our higher listened to episodes. So we were really excited about that. And that actually reminds me, Kayla, I still need to get your poem posted on our website. So make myself a note. I will get that done for you all. But Kayla and Jordan had expressed some interest in coming back onto the show and talking with us about some of the things that are very troubling for them about the temple recommend interviews. And so as we set our intention today, we're going to talk about the difficulties in the culture of this, in the intent of what's going on behind these recommend interviews rather than the historicity of them. So we're not going to be talking about, how back in Joseph Smith's day, one of your questions would have been, have you stolen anybody's cow? Which I believe is a real thing. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to the Analyzing Mormonism with Julia Sanders, and she talks about that historicity changes in one of her TikToks. So go look her up. Analyzing Mormonism can be found website, TikTok, and other social media. So she does a great job with that. We are going to focus more on the behavioral and mental health implications, some of the concerning patterns and behaviors, some of the negative consequences, intended or unintended, in this, and just kind of our own personal experiences of what this meant for us. A goal to help us connect with our audience and help you feel not as alone. And so we're really excited. And I'm actually just going to turn the time over to Jordan and Kayla because they created an awesome outline for us. And so take it away, Kayla and Jordan.
All right. So I guess I'll get started. So as far as just kind of the process, just to explain it for anybody who's not been through it, basically, in order to go to the temple, which is considered to be like the most holy place within the church, you have to be considered worthy, and that has to be declared by you, your bishop, and your stake president, who are like the local leaders near you. And in order to do that, you have to have an interview with both your bishop and your stake president. These take place every 2 years. And then, assuming you pass, you get a card that says that you are worthy to enter the temple. And you have to take that with you every time you go. That has a barcode on it. They scan it when you go in to make sure that you have been declared worthy to go. And
it kind of reminds me of like a Sam's Club or a Costco membership. Like you can come into the lobby, you can kind of peek around the corners, but to actually get in and partake, you have to show your little card ID. And I think the other thing that's really interesting to me is the duplicity of you go to your bishop and you go through this interview, and then you go to your stake president, and your stake president asks you the exact same questions. So it's like, why can't we just get asked the questions once? I mean, they're problematic as in general, but this duplicity of, it's almost like, Mason, like I think of like military service where it's like, okay, I went and talked to the first sergeant, and the first sergeant was like, great, you're good, I have no problems with this. And then you have to go and talk to your commander, your captain, your major, your colonel, whatever above you, and get them to also say, yep, I'm good too. Like there's a breakdown in the chain of command where they're not talking to each other, and you have to do it twice, which is just a waste of time and double. It's like this like reinforcement loop that is like pushing down on the importance of how traumatizing this is.
I think there's probably appropriate reasons for having two people involved, but as we're going to talk about just the problems with this interview process in general, I don't think that's worth really discussing why they might do that or why that is probably okay when we're going to spend a lot of time talking about things that are going on that aren't appropriate.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's just important to remember that as we go through all of these things, you're doing it twice. Keep in mind, audience, that you're not just doing this with one person, you're doing it with two. And that both of those people are men in authority who have been set aside to judge you.
Mm-hmm. No, they're literally called judges in Israel. So
right. Yep. All right, go ahead.
And just one other thing to add to that. So in the church, it's a wide held belief or doctrine that those who are set apart as bishops and stake presidents are given the gift of discernment.
Mhm.
So, they are supposed to have the ability through the Holy Ghost to, tell if you're lying, to tell if you are worthy, regardless of how you answer the questions. And so,
Right, kind of like psychics.
yeah, exactly. And you're really just on the spot there, trying
Mhm.
to convince them that you are worthy.
Yeah.
Well, and I love that you guys started your outline with like the question, what is worthiness?
Mhm.
So take it away.
Yeah.
What is worthiness?
So I felt like talking about worthiness was a big part of this because it's a word that is thrown around a lot in the church. If you are quote unquote worthy, and even from like babyhood, you are taught the covenant path, which I don't know if you've like talked about that before, what that means, but
We
the
have not.
baptism. So covenant path would be like baptism at 8, ordination, repentance, and then continuing like through the temple, and then enduring to the end. So like you're a lifelong Mormon basically, and
Yeah.
following that. And so I mean, even as a baby, we're taught these things. Like in the nursery, like little kids are taught, the simpleness of I love to see the temple song, and that you have a mom and a dad, and that if your mom and dad go to the temple, then you get to stay together forever. And so being worthy to go to the temple is a big deal. It's a fear. In fact, I told Jordan yesterday that my parents were civilly married and did not go to the temple until after my oldest sister was around 1 or so, I believe. And I remember hearing that story as a child and having like this little like jolt of fear come into my heart and being like, our family, are they going to be together forever? And then like having like the reassurance that, oh no, it's okay because mom and dad did go through the temple later.
Right, they fixed it. So now you're good.
So now
but
we're
if they
good.
hadn't fixed it,
Yeah.
there was a time where you might die and not be with your mommy and daddy again.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right. As a little kid, being separated from your mom and your dad is terrifying.
Yeah.
It's that's super fear provoking. One of the things that stands out to me is that like in the church, worthiness has to do with transactional behaviors. If I do these things, if I think these things, I'm worthy.
Mhm.
Whereas according to the Oxford Dictionary on Google, the word worthy means having or showing the qualities or abilities that merit recognition in a specified ways, or as a noun, a person notable or important in a particular sphere. And what really stands out to me is that in order to have those qualities and abilities or to be notable enough for that recognition in Mormonism, they are judging your outward behaviors and asking you to judge your internal thoughts and feelings in order to qualify for this, rather than having it just be something that is natural. Like it's, if you don't, there's that fear piece attached to it. Whereas this is, you have these abilities. So, it would be like, I am worthy of being a licensed professional counselor because I've gone to school. So that would be transactional. And then I've got all of this experience, and my, clinical statistics demonstrate that I'm effective. That would be kind of that combined. There's outward behaviors that can demonstrate it, but there's also something internal that is just innate in us, I guess, is kind of what I'm trying to say. And I probably give a bad example because that's totally measurable, but I think that as humans, we are worthy of living with our family forever, as long as our family wants that. Like if you believe in living with your family in the afterlife, then you deserve that because you're human. You deserve to continue those healthy bonds and connections if you want it. And I think that that's a really important thing. Like for me, I would not want to be with my parents forever because that wasn't fun for me here. So I wouldn't necessarily want to carry that on later unless there were some drastic changes. But that does not mean that I am not worthy of having that gift if it is in fact something available to me later in life. This is almost like if you don't behave in certain ways, if you don't do certain things, then you're not going to get love. The love is going to be withdrawn from you. The connections and community that you've established, no matter where it came from or how healthy it is for you, you will be separated from all of that because you didn't check the boxes that we said you need to check. And those are covenant path and then staying in the church forever and enduring to the end.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it really kind of demonstrates the difference between the LDS Church and other similar churches that are centered more on the works-based salvation rather than grace-based, where a lot of evangelical churches lie. That in order to be worthy or good enough for God's love, which the temple is, going to the temple is supposed to be the ultimate expression of God's love. In order to be good enough for that, you have to be good enough yourself. You have to be doing the things to be good enough for God's love. And, that's it. Like that right there is just a setup for, a lot of mental trauma and problems within people's minds of trying to reconcile that. Like,
I kind of feel like it's like The Good Place. Like the television show, The Good Place, that you can do all of these amazing things. You can demonstrate self-improvement and growth. And no matter what, it's not enough. And you're going to the bad place because God cannot look at you without the least degree of allowance, so on and so forth. So
I'm going to play just a little bit of the devil's advocate here. It's complicated, right? So if you've seen The Good Place, it wasn't necessarily that you couldn't do enough good. It was that the way that the system was set up is that your good actions were judged by all kinds of
variables.
Ripple effect. Like for the example they give is that you could go eat a tomato, which is a quote unquote healthy choice. But because you're eating a tomato that got
harvested
or picked from a sweat factory, or that the drug dealers were the ones that did this, you got penalized for that as if that's your issue. And so it's complicated. And really what it comes down to here is, well, it's interesting that Jesus, when he was on the earth, at least what we have that is supposedly his words, was all about breaking down the establishment, at least the power of the establishment, not necessarily the establishment itself, but the power of the establishment. His standards were all about your living, and they were vague. There was no do this specifically or do that specifically. It was a vague sort of be good to people kind of a thing. And the problem is, if you have a church that wants to support people in being good, they also need financial support. And so it kind of is a circular thing where you end up with an organization that might be trying to do the best it can to help people be good. But if they don't have money, they fall apart. They can't do their job. And that sometimes will lead to kind of what we're dealing with here with Mormonism. You have an organization now that has plenty of money and they control a significant amount of what they would call necessary spirituality.
Well, and again, I think it comes down to it's that transactional piece of, when you look at the temple recommend questions, it's, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe Joseph Smith was a prophet? Are you paying your tithing? Are you obeying the word of wisdom? So are you staying away from coffee and tea? They don't really talk about the getting up early and the exercise and the eating healthy part. They just talk about, because there were times in my life where I was definitely not exercising and eating healthy, and I could still get into the temple because I didn't drink coffee and tea. And really where you lose this is you can be doing amazing things that bring goodness into your life and other people's lives, and not believe that Joseph Smith is a prophet and not give the Mormon church money, and you can drink coffee and, alcohol and still be amazing, but that's not enough. You don't check the boxes. It's not enough transaction. You didn't pay into the system. Therefore, you can't get in. You have to pay to play. And I love here that you guys put on, that this is the perfect example of the bite model, where it's we hold the power and control over your salvation. Because if you're not doing it the way that we said, under the ramifications that we claim, and you have to come into one of our dudes to get checked in on, you cannot go to the best heaven, and you will be separated from the people that are supposed to love you the most and that you're supposed to love the most. You can buy Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, anywhere books are sold, including Audible.
Picture this. You're not just fixing cars, you're living your passion every day. At Cox, you'll work on a diverse range of automobiles. Surrounded by a team of friendly, like-minded individuals, you'll enjoy great pay and benefits. Ready to make this a reality? At Cox, we're recruiting auto and diesel techs to join our Mannheim and Fleet Services teams. Learn, grow, and fine-tune your career as a technician at Cox. Find out more at cox.career/autotech.
And so, it's a complete authoritarian system of do it our way, we check the boxes, and then you can go. So pay to play.
It ends up being that way anyway. I'm not sure if it was actually built to be that way. There's, you could form your own opinions about that, but it is that way now. Same as like when Jesus came and he said the law is fulfilled. His idea was that you're not going to live the law of Moses anymore. You're not going to have these 660 rules plus everything that people had added to it. You're not going to have that anymore. What you need to do is govern yourself now. And when churches get involved, they oftentimes will take back control by putting back the rules. They're different rules, but they're still rules. They're still things that are measurable and things that they can judge you by.
Right. It's the Pharisaical rules, again, that do not make sense.
Yep.
Some of them, sure. Most of them, no. And it's usually kind of a mix. It's like, okay, I see where you're trying to go with this, but then it breaks down when you make it all inclusive. It's kind of a pass-fail system, because if you cannot answer even one of these questions the way that you're expected to answer them, you don't go. Doesn't matter what else you have going on, but you can't go. So,
yeah, exactly.
Alrighty.
And, one thing I wanted to say was related to that. I don't know if you've ever listened to Dan McClellan. He's a biblical scholar that used to work for BYU, but he has a lot of fantastic material on what's called boundary maintenance, which is essentially how an organization sets up lines that kind of demarcate where we can say we are us and you are the others. And that's all about what this is all about, that setting up those boundaries so we can say that we are these people and you are not.
Well,
you're not us.
Like George Orwell in 1984, his book, he talks about all the people are reporting on one another, and that that's part of a society that we're all kind of watchers of each other. All of us are our brothers, keepers, and in the same way, we are. You meet a new couple who comes into your church for the first time, and you're looking at all of these different things. You're looking at like their clothing, and like especially like women's clothing, because you can tell more like, are they wearing their garments? Do they have piercings? Do they have tattoos? Do they have, what is their style? You're looking at, and even outside of it, growing up in Utah, because it's very Mormon central area, people won't let your kids play with your kids if you show up at pickup after school in a tank top, and
Right.
like just really, really minimal things like that. But if you come to church and you're there, then you're a project, then you're like, oh, so you haven't gone to the temple yet? Let's see how we can get you there. And then you become a personal savior,
Right.
for that person, because you are leading them onto the covenant path, teaching them like how to go to the temple. And now we can all be buds. So
Right.
it's great, and so it creates that internal checklist, but it also creates this pressure on you to make sure everybody around you is also conforming and doing what they are supposed to do. Because this is going to bring the most happiness, right?
Yeah. Well, and we kind of chuckle at it, but it's a real thing, especially in those concentrated Mormon areas where people are going to judge me and how I'm doing spiritually based on the underwear lines they can see on me. Like, I have never been a part of any organization that focused on my underwear as much as Mormonism. And I remember having an experience in North Carolina where a gentleman came. He was our elders quorum president at the time, and he felt it was his responsibility to tell me that what I was wearing was not modest because he could see like the elastic line. So like he couldn't see my bra strap. He could just see the elastic lacy thing at the collar of my shirt. I was a nursing mom at the time. Like, I mean, I was whipping my boob out all the time. And I have this elders quorum president feel like it was okay for him to be like, hey, Sarah, your shirt is not modest enough, especially for church, because I can see a 1/4 inch of your garment line on the neck. And that seems ridiculous. And I know that a lot of people still active in the faith are going to say, oh, well, that's really extreme. That doesn't happen that much. It's just a couple of people. And I'm here to tell you, no, it's really not. I'm going to say there are many, many, many people who focus on your underwear. I remember in 2004, shortly after I cheated on Mason, I took my garments off for a little while. I was really mad at my bishop. Like, you can go read that whole story in my book, Trauma Bonded. And I took my garments off, and my mom noticed. And, she asked, and I was like, I just not sure really what to believe. And the next thing I knew, I was getting letters from my grandparents, from friends, from my bishop, from people saying, hey, you really need to put your magic panties back on in order to have the spirit with you during this time of struggle.
Wait.
If you don't wear that underwear, you're susceptible for more bad things to happen. And I would like to say I cheated on Mason with my garments on, and I stopped cheating on him and got better and fixed our marriage with my magic panties not on. So
I just want to know.
Go ahead, Mason.
I just want to know if your grandma actually said your magic panties. That's all I wanted to know.
No, but I've kind of started just calling them magic pioneer.
You mean
panties.
You were embellishing the story?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm a Lee, so yes, I was.
So really, the problem is an organization that creates the ability for people to do this. Right? And we talked about that a little bit when we talked about the priesthood and. That how men are raised in the church and stuff, but ultimately that's the problem. So maybe we can move on.
I just wanted to mention, so I think I mentioned Richard Rohr in our last interview too, because I just find him so amazing. Anyway, but he, in his book, Falling Upward, he talks about how religion is a great way for us in like the first half of our faith journey in life. It's kind of like the growing period of our teenage soul. That, like, you know, in that time, it's really important, or it can be really good for us to have, you know, checkbox path.
Right. It's
You know,
it's predictable structure. It's a framework that we can really kind of fill out as we grow with our own developmental level. Absolutely love it.
But then as we grow and we are moving more into the second half of our faith life, that it becomes very critical for our development to be able to leave that structure behind. And so what I found in myself it was really good for me personally, because I'm definitely like a checklist person, and I like that. But I found that it was actually stunting my growth spiritually, because it didn't force me to critical think later on. And it didn't force me to really move outside of the box. It kept me very much in a box. And so I think his whole work is fascinating as well. Yeah.
And even more so, it teaches you that that's where you need to be. It's
Yeah.
not even that it doesn't teach you how to think outside the box. It teaches that you need to stay in the box. You need to stay. That's the only place that you're safe, is in the box. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny again. We finished The Good Place last night, so it's kind of on our heads. I actually kind of had a bet with myself how soon Sarah would bring it up. So, but since she brought
Sarah
it up,
had a little bit of a mental breakdown at the end of watching that, because something that occurred right at the end triggered me, and I literally started bawling and then had this huge insight, and it was crazy. I'll have to talk about that later. So yeah, thanks, May.
In season 4, the final season, they finally get to the real good place, and it's almost the moment they get there, they realize
something's
that everybody in the good place, there's something wrong. Everybody in the good place is numbed out.
Yeah, they're on autopilot.
They can't even think anymore, and they come up with a solution. But if you're living in paradise or safety, you don't grow. And that was kind of where they came to, is that you don't grow. But same thing, if you're in an organization that has done a lot of good for you, RFM calls it, you know, I graduated from 6th grade, or Sarah says I graduated and moved on.
I said I outgrew it. Yeah,
I outgrew it. Okay. Yeah. The idea being that you can use that to set up a lot of really good things. But if then you find that is restricting you from being able to move to other things that are also valuable, then maybe it's not the organization you want to continue to be a part of.
Well, and as we bring this back to, you know, these temple recommend interview questions, if you're following the quote unquote covenant path, the plan is, you know, and you're born in the temple. So I'm sorry, not born in the temple. That would be fascinating. I bet there's somebody out there somewhere whose mom went into labor in the temple and delivered in the temple. That would be kind of fun. That's a fun story. You know, I need to find that person, right?
Sure,
no,
sure.
but meaning, like, if you were born and raised in the temple like we were, then generally you reach your max capacity of getting through all those steps, usually in your early 20s. So like for our guys, it's you go through the temple right before your mission, and then you finish up your temple stuff when you get married, which is in Mormonism usually very young. And then I would say that for brand new members, they are supposed to get from baptism to temple usually within 1 year. And then after that, it's all about enduring to the end. So it's like your highest achievement of what you have to accomplish occurs very early in your life. And then after that, it's just robot. It's just go back to the temple, get there all the time, renew your temple recommend it used to be every year. Now it's every 2 years, right? You got to renew this all the time. And then you just got to keep going. But it's they've changed it a lot in the last few years, but it used to be like, I remember Mason, the first, 16 years of our marriage, it was the same video, same voice, same everything. And you're supposed to just go and go. And I don't know of anybody who actually enjoyed watching it over and over. It's like my kids, they outgrew watching 101 Dalmatians 6,000 times when they turned like 7. They were like, oh, I can watch more than one movie now. Yep. And I kind of felt that way. Like I was going to the temple and I'm supposed to learn all these new things and I'm supposed to have these super amazing spiritual experiences in there. And I have to continue to check all these boxes with my bishop in this interview in order to keep it. But what value am I actually gaining out of it? What tangible value? And I think it really set us up for, I'm going to keep living my life this way. So that way I'm worthy for my bishop and my stake president. And for everybody else to see me, keep my magic panties on appropriately, so on and so forth. But I can go to the temple and I don't even have to think in there because it's the same thing over and over and over again. And even now, like the last time I went before leaving Mormonism, now it's a slideshow. And I went, okay, we went from like moving people to like it's death by PowerPoint. It's like a military exercise. So, alrighty. I love if you guys are ready to move on. I absolutely love here where Jordan. So our audience can't see this checklist, but you put under number 1B that the problem with worthiness is that the church really sets up a way for us to judge ourselves against others. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I feel like the whole process is meant to make you judge yourself both against others and judge others against yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and we do this naturally as humans. We compare ourselves to others. It's a natural thing,
Well,
keeping
you
up with
want
the
to put
Joneses.
yourself in like different circles. Like you want, like it's a way for your brain to categorize,
Right.
where you want to be. But yeah.
Yeah, but you're continually like thinking as you're getting ready for an interview or as you're going through the interview with your bishop, you're thinking like, well, what is there in my life that I need to confess of?
Mm-hmm.
What have I done wrong that puts me below other people, that would make me unworthy? And how can I correct that? And like just an example from my own life, when I went on my mission, you first spend the first several weeks at the missionary training center. And while I was there, my bishop, in our branch there stressed incredibly, stressed very much that we needed to confess of anything that we had ever done that could even put us like very slightly close to that margin of what would be wrong,
Right.
because otherwise we wouldn't have the Spirit with us for our entire mission. And so I went in.
Wait. So if you didn't catch it and talk about it in that specific interview, the Spirit would withdraw from you for 2 years.
Exactly.
Because you missed it that one time.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your second point here, bishops have way too much power.
They do. Yeah.
We just talked about it. Yeah. That's crazy.
And I just want, I wanted to say, I went in and I talked to him. I confessed that I had made out with my girlfriend and touched underneath her breasts, not her breasts themselves, just underneath them. And I had felt so bad about that, because
so you're saying you provided the underwire with your hand for a moment.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Exactly.
How
Yes.
uncomfortable.
I know.
Great.
And I mean, Kayla has, if you want to tell your story about.
Which one?
Didn't you have a story about like feeling like you had to confess something?
No, I don't remember.
Oh, never mind. Okay, never mind.
So I actually do. I remember when I was 16, I'd had sex with my boyfriend and I went in, and the first time I went in, I was pretty mad because like the bishop's like, you have to confess. And I'm like, why? You already know what happened. My parents told you, so I shouldn't have to confess anything. But then as he, met with me once a week over the course of the next 4 months, there was this, kind of pressure put on me to make sure that I had covered all the bases and told the bishop everything. And so I remember for like the next several weeks going in and being like, well, there was this other boyfriend and we made out a little bit and I put my hands down in his pants. And there was this other, and my bishop gratefully after like the second time of this was like, Sarah, I think once you've been like, I've struggled obeying the law of chastity, which is the Mormon's sexual code, for the last couple of years, you're good. I don't need the play-by-play. And I'm really grateful for a bishop that kind of put that boundary there, that was like, you confessed, to the like umbrella. Okay. The umbrella being you've struggled with the law of chastity, which most teenagers do. It's age appropriate. It's behaviorally appropriate. You're supposed to explore as a teenager. Let's talk about boundaries, but I'll get off my counseling soapbox there. But I was very grateful. He's like, you already told me about the umbrella. I know that there was some rain there. Now let's just move on. I don't need a play-by-play because I can't tell you how many clients I have counseled where the bishops would ask such intrusive questions, like even questions that like in counseling. So when you go to counseling and your counselor is asking you questions about what happened, you do not have to tell them. Like you can say, I'm not comfortable talking about that. I had this conversation actually the other day with a really good friend where she was telling me, the thing I hate the most about counseling is I go in and I have to like tell my whole story again. And I just don't want to do that. And I was like, actually you don't have to. All you have to do is like, give us like the synopsis, like give me a 5-sentence synopsis. Like, in our relationship, we've dealt with this thing more than once. I've struggled with feeling and figuring out where I belong in this at this time. And I'm coming to counseling right now because I feel like if my partner and I can work on fixing our communication and practicing more empathy, we'll be good to go. That's all I need to know as your counselor. I don't need the play-by-play of everything from the time you were little, especially since on that first session, you don't know me. You don't trust me. I don't need you to like emotionally vomit everything up. And it's traumatic to do so. Mm-hmm. And yet here you are. I've got so many clients that have talked to me about bishops saying, well, how many times did you A, B, and C? How many times did you masturbate? What were you thinking of? What were you looking of? What time of the day was it? Where were you located? Like, no, that's not appropriate. And it perpetuates trauma. And it's called grooming. And that is where our bishops are really in a precarious place, and where a bishop that doesn't have the highest moral standards, which if you're paying attention to the news, you're going to see a whole lot of Mormon leadership getting in trouble for sexual impropriety with children. This is a huge problem in Mormonism because we overtrust these male leaders and these female leaders. Like, I'm not even going to say it's just the male leaders, our female leaders as well. And so we are over trusting, which increases our chances of victimization. And so these bishops' interviews become a place where we're being groomed to share way too much. And whatever their intentions are, whether they're good intentions or not, you're still participating in grooming exercises or grooming issues where you're talking to kids about things that kids should not need to be talking about in detail with anybody unless they feel it's to their best interest. I mean, Jordan, you've talked about being an OB-GYN. If you've got a teenager presenting with an STD, you're not going to ask them when, where, who, how. You're just going to say, okay, did you have unprotected sex? Do you know if you or your partner, like, were there multiple partners involved? Great. Let's run the test. Let's find out what it is. Here's your treatment. And that's all you're asking. You're only asking enough to get the basic information that you need to treat it. Mason, I saw you put your hand up and I just ignored you. You want to?
That was so long ago. Yeah, I'm not even sure I remember when it was now.
Brat. That's true.
I was just going to bring in, the fact that bishops are untrained, right? Like you say grooming.
Yeah.
I can look at things that I might have done as a bishop that maybe could be considered grooming that absolutely that was not what was trying to be done.
Right.
But you put yourself in this situation where you feel like you need more detail, but you don't know. You don't know what you need, and you don't know the best way to heal someone or help them heal because you haven't been taught. You put me in the situation of a counselor. You've given me the authority of a counselor. Like, what I say is golden.
No. We haven't given you the authority of a counselor. You're viewed in that way. We've given you the authority of God. We've given you the authority to say you can go to the temple and participate and have all these wonderful things, or you can't because you screwed up.
Well, and what I mean is you can say that they have the authority of God in what their judgments are, but they have the authority of a counselor in that their advice is accepted as
God's
good
will.
advice.
Right.
Well,
Because
not
it's-
even necessarily God's will, but maybe so, but it's accepted as good advice. Whether somebody says, well, that must have come from God, or, well, the bishop said it must be appropriate. Either way, you end up in a situation where people might be getting bad advice that is going to be hurtful because they think that person knows, and they don't. Okay, speaking as a former bishop, I'd have made a lot more mistakes if I hadn't had a counselor for a wife. And of course, I didn't talk about anybody specific, but I talked about situations, and I learned a lot about how to handle things differently or to refer them more quickly and say, you know what, this is something you need to see somebody, a professional, about, so that you can work through whatever's going on in your life.
Right.
Go ahead, Kayla.
I remembered my story.
People learn best through relatable stories. So that's why we're so story heavy. So hit us. Yes.
I was probably around 11 or 12. No, I was like 12. And this is good because it speaks to, one, being young, and two, the trust that we put into these male figures who don't have any training. And so when I was about 12, AOL was huge and chat rooms were huge. And
MySpace?
Yes. No, MySpace wasn't there yet, but chat rooms were the big thing.
You've given us enough variables to work out your age, Kayla. Good job. Let me work on this. You keep talking. I'm going to work on this one, okay?
So chat rooms were big. I remember like getting onto AOL and the dial-up connecting and getting into the chat rooms. And there were, there was a lot of like people out there who wanted to talk about, get people into a chat room and talk about sex, and so I, as a 12-year-old, got into a chat room, started having some we would say like are very inappropriate conversations with people who you don't know, and like I'm thinking as a 12-year-old like that it's a guy and asking me inappropriate questions about like, what's your bra size, what's your underwear, like, kind of stuff like that, like, do you touch yourself, things like that. And going away from like those conversations and feeling just this huge amount of guilt. Like I didn't know much at all about, these kinds of interactions, and internet is so new, and you don't know about catfishing and all of that at this point. And as a 12-year-old, I definitely didn't know that term. And so I remember telling my mom about it and feeling like really guilty, but more so, I felt strongly like that I needed to go talk to my bishop. Like that, even more than talking to my mom, I needed to talk to my bishop. And I remember like calling or like asking them if I could meet with the bishop or something like that. And I am how old? Like 12. And
and I want to put out here, you're a victim.
Yeah.
And as the victim, you're going to the bishop to repent. Not recognizing that you've been victimized because you've never been taught boundaries, and not that your parents failed you on that. Like you said, the internet was brand new. I remember, with my kids, it was like Snapchat is like the huge danger zone right now because you can get groomed and it just disappears and it's very difficult to trace it. So it's about, hey, if somebody's asking you these questions, come talk to me. Whereas for you, it was somebody asked you these questions. You might have engaged with it. Oh my God, you're sinning. Now you need to go repent.
Yeah.
You were victimized. So let's take a quick commercial break. Unpacking Mormonism. We'll be right back.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
So and I also remember thinking when I went to go talk to my bishop, like, oh my goodness, is he going to take away, like, am I going to have to not take the sacrament on Sunday? Like, which is the bread and water, and thinking that. And I have actually had so many friends who have told me that in situations where it's been a woman or a girl, or it's been a couple and it's a girl, like that they're maybe not married and that they have broken some law of chastity, and that oftentimes it's the woman who they say you can't take the sacrament, and oftentimes it's like the boy gets off kind of scot-free on that end. And so there's, like, again, that power authority that the bishop has, it's like asserting their power over women in the church, keeping them in line. And of course, like Jordan said this yesterday when I told him the story, that well, it's the woman's fault, of course, because like she shouldn't be wearing such a short skirt. She shouldn't be doing this. So like guys can't control their thoughts, but women can control what they wear and what they do. And
and women can control guys' thoughts. If I'm wearing something semi-revealing, like my elders quorum president seeing the teeny tiny little bit of lace of my garment, whatever, while I'm wearing a nursing top, suddenly I'm controlling his thoughts, and I need to fix it so that he's not tempted at church. And I was just like, well, you're creepy, dude. For
the record, you're not controlling men's thoughts. You're focusing them. We're already thinking about that stuff. I mean, right. I'm just throwing that out. I meant it kind of as a joke, but it's real, right?
Right.
If it's a teenage boy or a young man, you're not influencing that person's thoughts at all. You're simply focusing them on you.
I'm not. You are.
Right. And again, that person is doing that. Yeah. So it is not on the woman at all, but it's easier for the people in authority to blame somebody else. And that's what's happened.
Well, and I think, in this point of the outline that you guys sent us, we're talking about, you say that these questions start at 11, and you're correct. So in Mormonism right now, so Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church, you get your first temple recommend interview at 11. But you're groomed into this because you have your first inappropriate interview with the bishop in order to get permission to be baptized as an 8-year-old. So you're already in this as an 8-year-old. And one of the points that Mason brought up, I don't remember Mason a couple weeks ago or whatever, was we believe that 8-year-olds cannot sin, and yet we are baptizing them, or you cannot sin until you're 8. And so we're giving them these interviews and asking them these questions when, according to the doctrine, they have not sinned yet at all, because you're not accountable for your choices until you're 8 years old. But you get your first, like, what used to be one-on-one, so 8-year-old child, male or female, with grown-up man, male bishop, asking personal questions about your quote-unquote worthiness. And in Mormonism, worthiness is directly related to your sexual thoughts, actions, behaviors, development. Like the number one thing, like if I'm drinking coffee, people are usually not going to say I'm not worthy to go to the temple. They might put it in a blanket statement. Yes, it kind of gets pushed in there. Hey, Jessica Frankel, by the way, thank you so much for your thumbs up and for being with us today. Just squirrel moment there. But the thing is that when we talk about somebody's, there's my squirrel. When we're talking about somebody's worthiness, almost always in our language, worthiness has to do with sexual purity according to what is pure by the Mormon Church.
Or the word of wisdom.
Or the word of
Both
wisdom.
Of those kind of fall into that. But I think those are probably the two biggest ones.
Right. So we're talking about tea, coffee, alcohol use. Oh, and cigarettes and drug use, and then sex. And I would say in my experience, it was mostly focused on my sex, my sexual development, actions, thoughts, whatever. But we actually start these teachings like itty bitty, like family home evening in the home. When you're first born, you enter the church's Sunday school lessons when you're 18 months old, and we're already talking about the temple. We're already talking about You have to go to the temple to be with your family, blah, 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 blah. So definitely an issue. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Sam Young, because what Sam Young did was he was the bishop that started to advocate for safety for our children in those interviews. And frankly, also safety for our leadership. Because, you know, if you've always got a witness, if you're always, you know, quote unquote, too deep leadership, you're less likely to victimize somebody. So this is like safety for everybody involved. But Sam really focused mostly on the kiddos of get a parent, get a peer, get somebody else in that interview that the child feels comfortable with. And what happened, I'm going to say that Sam was the voice of God protecting our children, that the LDS church listened to, because obviously God did not give them this message on his own. It came from Sam Young. But before they implemented the changes, they excommunicated Sam for speaking out against this. So if you're interested in this, go research what happened to Sam Young. He got excommunicated for speaking out for the safety of children, because the policy of the church was not protecting children in these interviews that we are talking about right now. These interviews are what Sam Young was trying to advocate change for. And the church excommunicated him. And then they took everything he suggested and implemented it and claimed that it came from God. So number one, Sam, thank you so much for being God to the Mormon church on this one. And then getting kicked out of Mormonism for being God, because obviously the leaders couldn't hear it from the actual God who they're supposed to be talking to in the highest rooms of the temples.
Yeah.
So way to go,
I just
Sam.
want to add, I was just to contrast it kind of, I was a financial clerk for quite a while when I was active in the church. And at all times, whenever there is tithing money in the room, there always have to be 2 Melchizedek priesthood holders at all times until the money is deposited at the bank.
Unless
So
it's the bishop. Unless it's the
money.
bishop.
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So they take their money really seriously, and I'm glad they're taking kid safety more seriously now.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think that, like, also one of the things you can get automatically excommunicated for and never come back in is if you siphon any tithing money away. But then, like, if you touch the church's money, then you're automatically excommunicated. It's like a big deal. But if you inappropriately touch a child, you get to talk to the church's lawyers. You're not excommunicated. It's really sad. Yeah, they protect their money more than they protect their children. Mason.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, it doesn't have to be a Melchizedek priesthood holder. The financial clerk does not have to be a Melchizedek priesthood holder.
He usually is. Always, it doesn't have to be.
It almost always is, but it doesn't have to be. And like you said, it's always 2 people, unless it's the bishop. And then I just want to kind of create a scenario. This is for those of us that are just thinking, you know, this stuff, why does this happen? Or it's only the bad guys that are doing this. Let me just give you a scenario. I'm a bishop sitting in an interview with a 13-year-old girl who gets sad about something, like whatever it might be. They're confessing something, or they're talking about something. Maybe they're talking about how their parents are arguing or whatever. They're sad. They're crying in this interview. What does the bishop do? Does he sit there like this rigid man and stare at them? Or does he walk over there and give them a hug? And the moment you walk over there and give them a hug, you've crossed a line that no one's going to know about. This girl's not going to go home and tell her parents, because what was she crying about? Her parents arguing. She's not going to tell them. And so then the bishop is going to follow up again in a month, in a week, and say, hey, Sarah, how you doing? And now you've created this place where he is the safe person. The parents aren't the safe person. An older sibling's probably not the safe person. The safe person is this bishop. And even the best bishops are going to find themselves sometimes in an uncomfortable situation where they may make a choice that's not appropriate. and they find themselves in a situation they can't control anymore, or don't feel like they can control anyway. And of course, this isn't every bishop. Of course, this isn't even a majority of bishops that this happens. But you have a system that sets up the possibility for it.
Exactly.
And the possibility is there every single time. The possibility exists in every single interview where you're alone. Maybe it's an adult woman who's complaining about her husband who's being abusive, or blah, blah, blah. You become the comforter, and you put yourself in a situation that allows for problems.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, like when I'm in session and these things are occurring, I document it. Like I have to document it. And I'm working on empathy, but then let's bring parents in as long as they are safe so that we can work on this. Like it's not meant to be secret. And if I ever identify that there's a potential that the child is being victimized in home where it's not safe for me to bring the parents in and work on this and talk about it, I'm going to report that to the authorities. Like there are certain in the medical field or in the academics, like, I've had some of my kiddos go and cry on the shoulder of a teacher before. There are certain safeguards in place so that that child is protected. And as long as I'm following ethics, then those safeguards usually work. When they don't work is when counselors and other professionals are not practicing ethically. And the issue in Mormonism is that when you have these bishop interviews and these stake president interviews, they are infallible. They don't report to anybody above them. Because they're confessionals, they get certain privileges to secrecy that are not necessarily appropriate. And so it just becomes super concerning. And I'm going to say, most of the bishops are doing their best to be empathetic, be a good spiritual leader, to lead with love and not to cross those barriers. But again, look at the news. There's enough non-oversight that our kiddos are being victimized left and right. And the church's response is call our attorneys to talk to them, not the local law enforcement, not the systems that have been set in place to do appropriate investigations and interventions in several states. So the only time there is a misconception, I want to clear this up. The only time the church says call the hotline instead of the authorities is when the state law allows it. So like when you're looking at the state of Arizona, those bishops did not have to call the authorities because of the confessional law in Arizona. In other states, the church would say you have to call the local authorities and the hotline. And so I just want to clarify that where our greatest work as we fight to keep our children safe in these ecclesiastical interviews and these confessionals is we've got to change the law in the states that allow child abuse to be confessed in a religious setting with no intervention from the legal authorities that are trained and meant to protect our kids. That's what needs to change. Like I know we're all yelling at the church, and I agree with raising that awareness to the church because you're not going to get in trouble. Usually there's laws that protect, like it could be a bishop that says, hey, I'm an ecclesiastical leader. This was reported to me. It needs to be investigated, blah, blah, blah. And they're not going to get in trouble for doing that. There's no law that says you're not allowed to report it. There are laws that say you don't have to report it. And so really we need to say, hey, church, make reporting to the local authorities mandated as a church policy. And hey, states that allow for this, knock it off. Our kids are more important than confessing from sin. So that's my 2 cents. All right. So let's kind of move on into these problematic questions in the interview. So Alex, if you can kind of pull up the slideshow, and then whoever is talking, there you go. That's perfect. So Kayla and Jordan, I was going to let you go ahead and take this away. What are some of the issues that you're identifying here?
Yeah, sure. So the first three questions just ask about your testimony. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in Joseph Smith, that he restored the gospel? And I don't have a particular problem with those.
I actually do, because it's this conformity. In order to go to the temple, you have to, without question, accept Joseph Smith as a prophet of God. Meaning, if I'm concerned about Joseph Smith sleeping with 14-year-olds and being a sexual perpetrator, I have to squash that down, ignore it, and say, I'm going to spiritual bypass this. I don't understand what was going on here. And in order for me to go in, I have to ignore my concerns and claim, yes, he was a prophet of God. And that I believe that forever. So I think that one of the issues that I have with some of these testimony questions is it does not allow you, as we said earlier, to think critically out loud without the threat of not getting in. Like, I remember for a long time being concerned about this. God cannot pay attention to me if I've sinned even a little bit until my brother Jesus has been punished in some way, so I kind of like look at this as God is going to withdraw his love and attention from me unless Jesus is the whipping boy. So Sarah lied today. Let's whack Jesus. Okay, Sarah's good. Now she can talk to God again. Oh, no. Now Sarah got angry at one of the kids. Let's go whack Jesus. Okay, Sarah's good again. And so when I started to kind of question this, like, this is not cool. Like, I, as a parent, cannot ever imagine punishing my oldest, Eric, for something that my youngest, Tyler, did in order for me to continue to hang out with Tyler. So when I put it in that perspective of what does this actually mean, I'm not allowed to question that without losing access to what is supposed to be my only way to live with the people I love the most forever in heaven. So that's my issue with that. So.
Yeah, I like that point. The one thing I feel like is, for anybody who's struggling with faith in any of these things, like if the temple is the most spiritual place, you'd think that they'd want you to go there. So that's kind of one thing that I have taken issue with.
I think that's something that people don't recognize very often. That's exactly correct. Like even again, as a bishop, if someone comes in, and I'm not saying I did this because I follow the rules as a bishop, but if I could do it again, I would not take the sacrament from people who are struggling.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't. A lot of people get tons of comfort from taking the sacrament. They feel like they're on the right path. I wouldn't take callings away from people because of a sin that does not affect that calling. Now, you come and you confess to child abuse. I don't think you need to be a primary teacher, but not just callings in general. I wouldn't do that because those kinds of things are what keep you
connected with your community.
Whether or not they should. They do keep you connected with your community. They keep you connected with God. They keep you connected with Jesus. They keep you connected with your family. And the lack of them bring shame.
Right.
You can say that it's confidential, and Sarah's talked about this before too, because it happened to her. You can say it's confidential, but when someone gets released and you happen to notice one day that they didn't take the sacrament, you immediately go right to, something's going on in Mason's house. I wonder what that's about. It's not confidential, and it's hurtful. It's shameful because it brings shame to the people involved.
Well, then I want to just grow that with two stories. The first one is when I cheated on you, Mason, in 2004, my calling at the time was primary chorister. Now, I am a musician. My associate's degree was in music and dance education. And I absolutely loved that calling. I basically I hated Relief Society. Like, I'm so grateful that I hardly ever had to go to Relief Society because I was always in primary or young women's. Like, I think I could count on maybe in my 37 years of attending Mormonism, that I went to Relief Society maybe 15 to 20 times in all of that time. And I hated it every single time. It was boring, bunch of bleh, I hated it. But I had cheated on my husband. I was not a threat to children or anything. I got released from that calling, and then I got reinstated to it almost exactly a year later. So anybody that was paying attention, now gratefully it was a military ward, so half the people wouldn't have known anyway, because during that time, half the ward would have, like, turnover in military wards is very high. Now, fast forward in my life, when Mason and I were stationed at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina, I served as the primary president. And the way that this worked is, you know, if somebody got in trouble, the bishop would come to me. If they were already somewhat serving in primary, I would get they can't serve in primary anymore. You can't ask them to substitute in primary anymore, whatever. And that bishop was really good. He put the caveat on, just because they can't doesn't mean that they are sinning. It could just mean that they've said, don't put me in primary anymore. And I loved that, except that then when I would submit names for callings, it was pretty easy to figure out who was in trouble, quote unquote, in trouble, because the bishop would tell me no. And then if I was like, okay, I've submitted like 8 names, what's going on? And he's like, well, this person doesn't want to serve in primary. This person's going to another calling, and I can't really talk about these other 2 or 3. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on. And then my job as the primary president was to tell my counselors, okay, so this name that we submitted got a no, this one got a no, this one got a no. And they're like, well, why not? They're not serving in anything. And I was like, I don't know. Again, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. And if I had been specifically told by my bishop, this person cannot substitute or whatever, I had to pass that information on to my counselors so that they wouldn't go and embarrass them and ask. And then I would say the inevitable of it doesn't mean that there's a worthiness issue. I don't know what it means. We just can't ask these people. And we had a list, like a running list of who you could and could not ask to substitute in primary. And I mean, it wasn't meant to embarrass them, but it was absolutely not confidential. And anybody who works in the medical field or the behavioral health field understands what confidentiality actually means. Like, there is no, like, I am supposed to react in such a way that nobody that I talk to outside of my clinical staff, not my front office staff, my clinical staff, can know nothing.
Yeah.
When it's my patients, none of my other staff can access my patients' charts. I'm not allowed to look at my staff's charts in this office. I can't even access them. Like, it is set up in my digital charting system, so that I cannot see it unless I make a special request. And the only time I'm allowed to make a special request is if there is an ethical or a HIPAA type complaint. Yeah. So, like, it's so different. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So, all right. What's our next slide, Alex, on this nice little slideshow? Is that if everybody's done talking about that? Okay, here we go. Okay. Go ahead. Kayla,
so I have a lot to say about this. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways that you have a relationship with your bishop without you even realizing it, and that we give them so much authority, too much power in our lives. I talked about it earlier that, as a 12-year-old girl, I felt like I had to go and talk to my bishop about that AOL chat room. And then, but it extends so much farther than that. You move to a new place, your bishop is your first point of contact. And normally they'll ask you to come in and talk to them as the new family in the ward or whatever. In college, I went to Brigham Young University, which is a church funded university.
Right, it's a private university.
Yes, private university. And you have to live in either off-campus housing, which is what I chose to do, but you have a bishop that you move into, and that, all of a sudden, this is your line of authority. You don't know this person. You move to a new place. Again, you don't know the bishop. You don't have a personal relationship with them. A lot of the time you don't know anything about them. You don't know their past or whatever, but you go into this automatically knowing that you have to tell them your life details. You have to give them, everything. And I have always been an oversharer. It's very and even when we moved into our new ward here where we live, which we left, I don't know, a few months after moving into the ward, but moving into the ward, we had just started drinking alcohol. And I had this huge conundrum, do I tell my bishop that I drink? I don't know my bishop. What am I supposed to do? Do I need to confess to them? Do I whatever? Because at this point I'm mentally out of the church, but physically attending. They call that PIMO, PIMO, physically and mentally out. And I had even written a letter to this bishop, trying to figure out what to tell them, how to tell them that I drink, and just feeling like I needed to confess. And luckily I had good friends who talked me down and said, hey, by the way, you don't need to tell them every aspect of your life. And I'm
Right.
oh yeah.
Well, and I think there's a culture there because your bishop is your direct representation for God, telling them everything is appropriate. It's supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be all of these things. What I want to comment, number one, I want to kind of decode this. So sustain the president of the church as exclusive, meaning we believe that he's the president of the church and the only prophet. Other than the first presidency and the quorum of the 12. So sustain FP is first presidency, and the quorum of the 12, those are the top 15 men. They are all sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators. And then beyond that is sustain all the other general authorities and local leaders. What happens, number one, when you move into a new ward is that your digital files are transferred to the new bishop. And if there's any flags for worthiness or welfare issues or anything in your record, the new bishop can see it, and the new bishop's supposed to call the old bishop and do a transfer of information. So there's really no such thing of starting over new with a new bishop. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? The things you know make you feel better even when it's impossible to make time for them. Like that workout you try to squeeze in between kids' activities, work, and everything else you have going on, and before you know it, it gets pushed to tomorrow. Sound familiar? But it's the moments when you feel like you have no time for yourself when those non-negotiables are more important than ever. Those are the things that keep you strong, healthy, motivated, and prepared to take on everything life demands of you. So why not make therapy one of them? BetterHelp Online Therapy makes it easy to get started with affordable phone, video, or live chat sessions you can do from anywhere, and the option to message your therapist between sessions if anything comes up. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
If the bishops are actually doing their job. The other thing is that there really isn't a chain of command. We talk about this chain of command, but what usually happens is it's circular. So if I go above my bishop's head and say, hey, I'm concerned, stake president, about this, the policy of the church is for the stake president to give your email to the bishop and say, well, you really need to work this out with your bishop. So, and if I go over the head of my stake president to my area authority, they give whatever you've said back down. And they basically say, work this out with your stake president. There is no such thing as a normal member getting to the top without all the other leaders below knowing about it. So if you have a complaint or a concern or an issue, there is no safety in going above and up the chain of command. Like Mason, you were in the military. If there was a problem in your chain of command, you went above that, knowing that if there was, policy or procedure issues, it would be investigated and taken care of. It wouldn't just be, in a good, healthy chain of command, it wouldn't just be tossed back down to whoever the complaint is about. because the policies and procedures were there for that chain of command to be safe. Within the church, your chain of command is more like pyramid scheming. It's more like hierarchical in the sense of, oh, you don't like your bishop, go up. Well, your bishop, so we're just going to push you back down because you're not high enough up in the leadership to really have your voice heard, which is why people like Sam Young and Kate Kelly and these other people were like, you're not hearing me. You just keep cycling me back down to my local leaders to fix something that is an issue at this higher level. How do I get people to hear me? And then that's why they go big and bold, which of course all of the members are like, well, that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to do it with this internal chain of command that is broken. And I mean,
as if they hadn't done that already.
Right. It's kind of like, well, you know what, Sam, you brought in all these great changes, but because you went public into the media about it, that's why you got excommunicated. Yeah. And it's like, hey, if you listen to Sam's story, he went where he was supposed to go first and was not heard. And it was not. And I mean, I am truly grateful to Sam because when I left the church and Mason hadn't, I sent an email to our bishop and stake president and said, if you interview my kids without me or my husband present, I will call the police. And they immediately stopped interviewing my kids without Mason or I present because I was like, that's against the law. Now that I put it in writing, I will press charges if you do. And it wasn't because I didn't trust my bishop. It was because I didn't trust the system to protect children. So keep going.
And the whole system is set up. If you set up a system based on infallibility, which is really what this system is based on, not that anyone will ever say that the bishop is infallible. They won't say that, but the culture still is that. You go to your bishop expecting that when it comes to your spiritual welfare, they are infallible because they are called by God. Why will the stake president not intervene? Because then he is questioning the call of this bishop by God. And if you question the call of the bishop by God, you've opened up the floodgates to question every single calling that exists in the church, every person all the way up to the prophet. They can't do that because everything would fall apart.
Yep.
It's also the reason why they don't apologize, because they cannot separate their humanity from their calling as prophets. They can't do it. Whether or not they want to, I don't know. I can't speak to that. They can't do it because the position they're in does not allow for it. And so what they do becomes very underhanded. Well, we're going to put this policy in. We won't tell anybody about it. Oh, we're going to take this policy out. We won't tell anybody about it. We're talking about the temple recommend questions. If there was an announcement, which I don't remember, if there was an announcement, it was like maybe in sacrament meeting. They didn't talk about why the questions had been changed. In 1990, when the temple ceremony had changed, they didn't talk about it. You just had to show up and find out, because they cannot talk about the reasons why things are happening and why they changed. They can't because they're in an untenable position.
Well, and I think, too, the other thing is that, like, at that top 15, they're supposed to be unanimous in any decision, and trying to get 14 old white men to be unanimous on anything is basically impossible, especially when you've got a couple of narcissists in there who always have to be right, who always have to be the smartest in the room. And if you're wondering what I'm referring to, just go back and listen to our episode about narcissism. I think it's like number 13 or something like that. All right, keep going.
Can I
Jordan and
just
Kayla.
a couple more things about this before we move on to the next question. When you're young, it's kind of drilled into your head what sustain means. So sustain means that you agree with, you support, and you'll do everything in your power to help these people, the president of the church, the first presidency, and especially your local leaders.
And
To include no criticism, constructive or otherwise. Like,
which is also one of the things in the temple. Obviously, that it's a different episode, but they specifically say there is not to be criticism of
the leaders,
of authorities in the church.
Well, the bishop asks you to come meet with them, like, saying no is not an automatic response. and
For a faithful member, right? You're not. It would be concerning to say no.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's also, just to be fair, that's an extrapolation that isn't accurate. Like, even in the temple, the covenant is no evil speaking of the Lord's anointed.
Yeah.
I mean, evil speaking and criticism, not even in the same realm.
Right. But then
that's the way that it's been sucked into our culture.
Right,
now
well,
we can't
and
even
then you have
criticize.
but then you have Elder Oaks, who says criticizing the leaders, even if the criticism is correct, is wrong. So that extrapolation,
we shouldn't be doing that. Yep.
Right. The extrapolation is supported by the man who is right now second in command.
Right.
The next prophet.
Yeah.
And going back to kind of what you're talking about with the chain of command as well, if you want to hear a really good story about somebody who tried to go up that chain of command, specifically related to Elder Oaks, Nemo the Mormon has a really good story on his YouTube channel about how he tried to go through his bishop, stake president, and everything to get his concerns answered, and it was just a mess. And it's been like several years, and he has not gotten his question.
That was a very good episode.
Yeah,
a very good episode that talks about this one.
Yeah, I have not heard that. So Mason, if you could make sure that Alex gets that put in the show notes and the links, I would, number one, I want to listen to it. And number two, I'd like our listeners to be able to follow up with that. All righty. Yeah. Do we have anything else on this slide before we go to the next one?
I think we'd like to skip to question 7, because we talked a lot about the chastity.
All right, hang on, go back. All right, so we've got Sabbath. Okay, so yes, this is like, are you, so we talked about the chastity. So these are like Sabbath day, meaning, are you attending all of the meetings that you can possibly attend? I want to say on this one, like, as a mother of 8 children, my oldest is 22 and a half. My youngest is 8. This was overwhelming for me. All of the youth activities, all of their school activities, all of, sports, just all of the normal. So I had to mix in Mormon activities with school activities, and I've got, competitive wrestlers, and I've got musicians and whatnot in my family. And I had that many kids adopted that many kids because the church told me that that's the right thing to do. It is gross over scheduling. Like, this is not just your Sunday meetings. This is, are you doing your best to get to your Wednesday activities and your kids to youth camp? And it is exhausting. It keeps you so busy that it is incredibly difficult to think about anything else. And then laws and commandments are, pretty obvious, but I want to add in that and just kind of remind you, I saw this like meme on Facebook come through, which were like the rules of Mormonism. And there were like, I don't know, thousands of them. And I think it was thousands of them. It may have been hundreds of them. I don't remember. I might be exaggerating here. But there were so many that I didn't even get through a quarter of them before I was like, okay, I'm done. And as a former Mormon, as I'm reading through these, they were all accurate. So it was insane. Mm-hmm. So, and then of course, full tithe payer, you have to pay to play.
So I have something for this. This is, Alex, for the memes that I sent you, just because I love this. Is that what came up? Is that what you have?
Oh.
That's muted.
So this is in the mask, the go-to club, right? This is the best place. And he asked the question, are you on the list? And he says, no, but I believe my friends are. Perhaps you know them, Franklin, Grant, and Jackson. And then he goes right in. I actually had those just in memes. He pulled up the video, which is great. But just
That's
that
awesome.
idea that if you want to get in, I don't know. Well, that's why I just narrated it for you. But just the idea that it's not necessarily a proud moment that I can narrate that for you, but I'm proud. So,
well, Jim Carrey did it better than you, Mace, but keep going.
He did, but I wasn't trying to match him. I can do a pretty good job, but I wasn't trying. So, but just the idea that there's that piece of that.
Yeah, I think this is something I'm still actually salty about. I think I've talked about this on the last episode, but this is, ultimately we got called in by our bishop after tithing what is it called?
Settlement.
Tithing settlement
Tithing
had
settlement.
happened. And we got called in because they were like, hey, you haven't declared your tithing yet. And we were kind of like, yeah, we didn't want to. but so that
I wanna
ended
have
up
that conversation.
having us come in and telling him, well, because it was more me at that point, but I said, I did not feel comfortable paying our tithing right now to the church because I did not support the bishop hotline and it being a system where abusers can get off because of this hotline. And there's that whole AP article, which we've talked about already.
Right.
And so,
And the SEC filing as well.
and we explained this to our bishop that these were the reasons why we felt uncomfortable with it. And that we currently wanted to try to pay tithe. Like, I'm like, if we could pay tithing to other organizations, like that we had fully vetted and understood and knew, that we would be happy to donate 10% in that way. But our bishop ultimately said, no, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take away your temple recommend for not paying tithing to the church. And I knew that was, I had already basically made my peace with that before, that I would not have a temple recommend after this meeting that he called like at church for us to come in. We had very little prep time before this, and so I don't know. I do feel a little salty.
Which, by the way, for the record, the bishop technically cannot take your temple recommend from you. Can't be done.
He refused to renew it.
Yes.
Right. That's different, right? If you're going in for an interview, he can refuse to renew it.
Yeah.
But if you have a temple recommend, he cannot take it from you.
Yeah, I still have
He might then call the, he might call the temple or whatever.
Deactivate it, but he can't take up.
Right.
From you.
Right.
Yeah.
He can now because it's electronic, but
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, you couldn't even do that.
Yeah.
There was no
Right.
electronic. So yeah, just authority, right? We've given so much authority to these people who for the most part are good people, but they have authority that they don't understand the ramifications of.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I remember, Mason, having a conversation with one of your brothers who is, was struggling with the gospel at the same time. And he was like, his biggest thing was the church has a monopoly on heaven. Like, the only way you can get into heaven is if you pay into the Mormon system according to Mormonism. Like when I first started struggling, I told Mason, let's treat this like it's a divorce situation. And I will take 5% of our income and I will donate that to whatever charity I see fit. And Mason, you take 5% and you give that to the bishop. And then when you go to the bishop, you can be like, hey, it's kind of this. My wife and I have had to come to this agreement because I was like, I don't want to give to an organization that invests it rather than feeds the poor and the hungry. Like, I would much rather give my money to an organization that is doing what I want my money to do. And I'm about ready to jump into those class action lawsuits for give me my money back because I gave it to you under the impression that you were feeding the poor and the hungry and not investing it and bailing out insurance companies and building a mall. Like, that totally bothers me. Either that or give me my returns. Like, where's my, dividends or whatever? Like, you invested my money, so give me at least the return on that, because frankly, I gave you around $250,000. So you invested a good chunk of it. Where's my return on that? Go ahead, Kayla.
Well, this is an opinion conspiracy theory by Kayla.
Thank you for prefacing it as such.
But just in looking back on everything, I've learned and how the church treats men versus women in the church. I do think that the leaders are much less likely to excommunicate men than women, or at least or punish them in taking away their sacrament or those stigmas, because men are generally taught to be the breadwinners of the family. They are the main tithe payer of the family. If they punish a man, then that means that man now thinks that he is going to have to like that he might leave the church and then they may not have his money anymore.
Right. Well, because the only time the church will say you can no longer pay tithing is if you're excommunicated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you excommunicate the primary breadwinner, then they know you're no longer supposed to accept
Their donations. Yeah.
right. Absolutely.
For
I
the
also want to
record-
do
for the
hang on
record-
real quick. I want to just give a shout out to DJ. DJ had commented earlier. In fact, let me see. I think I can show this. Oh, hey, Alex did it before me. So DJ says sick questions. And so I was like, hey, can you elaborate? So here, can you elaborate? And he says being asked questions like that at age 12 is sick. That help. And I just want to say, yeah, DJ, it's disgusting. I think that most of us in the PMO and ex-Mormon space are really disgusted by it. But one of the things that's really interesting is I have a friend who I absolutely love, who is still very active in the church. And this friend who I trust to take care of my kids implicitly. Like I know that if she took care of my kids, they would be safe in her care. She does not see a problem with this. She is okay letting her kids go and have this question asked. And in any other organization situation, she would be like helicopter parenting this type of issue. In any other organization, like she homeschools her children because she doesn't trust teachers to be safe with her children. But the bishop is suddenly okay.
Yep.
And I am shocked at the mental gymnastics to get there, especially with the amount of sexual abuse in the news right now about Mormon church leaders taking advantage of this. And thank you, DJ, so much for saying that I'm sweet. That always makes me feel good. And I want to point out that I put that comment up instead of Alex to stroke my own ego. So
Hey,
thanks so much, DJ.
Just real quick, we have a hard stop in 20 minutes. So we need to just be aware of that.
Mason,
we got about maybe 10 more minutes.
We are actually okay. I worked it out with the teenagers behind the back. One of these times I was texting.
So
We're
did
good.
I. But Alex has a hard stop at 1 as well.
Did not
So
know that about Alex.
We,
All right,
we need to talk for maybe 10 more minutes and then close things up.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay. So is there anything else, Jordan and Kayla, that you wanted to say
Yeah.
about this? Go ahead.
Yeah, so this slide, this is questions 6 through 10 in the interview, but I think we missed question 7, which honestly I think is probably for me the most.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide and see where it is. Here we go. Go ahead, Alex. The other one. All right, is it there?
Yes, there we are. Okay, so the last one there. So we've talked pretty extensively about chastity and just finished talking about following the teachings of the church, but not supporting anything contrary to the church. So the question itself says, do you support or promote any teachings, practices, or doctrine contrary to those of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? And
It used to say organizations as well.
Okay, yeah. For me, this is the very most concerning question of all of them. And if we're kind of going back to the BITE model, so BITE stands for behavior.
It's behavior, information,
thought, and emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this question is specifically dealing with controlling your thoughts, which, as we know, are the basis for all of our actions and everything else that goes on. And for me, it's just so concerning. This is something where if you don't agree 100% with the church, like you can't answer this question. You can't say yes, or you can't say no, I don't support anything else. If you have a friend or a brother, sister, child who is LGBTQ, and you support them
you're an ally.
You're an ally. You love them, and you don't support the church's teachings about LGBTQ
if you
people.
publicly post something, if you wear a rainbow pin to church, if whatever, and and it's even more concerning because if you work for the church, I've heard stories of people getting fired for posting things about being an ally. So that's part of that. But then
for me, this is not just like some arbitrary thing. This is actively taught all the time. Like in this last general conference, the prophet of the church, the number one leader, President Nelson, specifically said, never take counsel of those who don't believe.
Right.
Like, that is really thought controlling, really just really harmful narrative.
Right,
you can't believe
it's
or think
right,
anything
you
that
cannot-
anybody else says.
Right. It's you cannot trust people who have a different opinion than you.
Exactly.
Well, and not even trust them. You shouldn't be listening to them, right? You're not going to go to RFM. You're not going to go to Mormonism Live or Mormon Stories or Nemo or your brother who left the church or your father who's struggling. You're not going to go to any of them because that is outside of the teachings of the church. You don't support those things. You don't support those ideas.
Mason, I'm going to actually carry this a little bit, so if you believe that those of us on the outside are actively working to harm those on the inside, then it makes sense why there would be maybe some distrust.
Sure.
So, but my example would be things like when I went and saw my GI specialist for like severe constipation and all of the meds were too much and gave me like massive diarrhea. My GI doctor said, do you drink coffee? Because it's a more gentle stimulant that will help your colon move. And so, like even just 6 ounces of coffee. And then I want you to like go for a walk or go for a run, like drink some coffee, then do your exercise or do your exercise and then drink some coffee. And let's see if that helps, because all of these meds are just too strong for you.
Mhm.
And I ignored him because my religious teaching was coffee is bad. Coffee is going to invite Satan into my life. And frankly, I struggled with bowel obstruction in part because I did not drink some coffee. And then, and I like literally had to go in for surgery. There were also some other complications, but it was my OB/GYN that discovered that all this pain that we thought was a cyst on my ovary was bowel obstruction in my colon. And I was in surgery for hours. It was supposed to be a cystectomy. Like they're just supposed to remove the ovarian cyst that was getting really big. And it wasn't an ovarian cyst. It was a bowel blockage. And they had to like basically fix my colon and whatnot. When I left the church, I started drinking my coffee. Hey, look, Daisy Girl merchandise. Woohoo. I started drinking my 6 ounces of coffee around the same time I did my physical exercise, and goodbye constipation. Now I get these natural, gentle bowel movements. I'm no longer constipated. I'm no longer experiencing intense abdominal pain that comes with chronic constipation. I also see a lot of like my LDS clients could not progress in their therapeutic settings because there was that inflexibility of thinking. So even though I wasn't necessarily challenging their belief, but because now I'm no longer an LDS counselor, that causes even more problems in my audience, or not my audience, my clients in trusting me. And so now they're not utilizing evidence-based treatments to heal marriages and relationships and anxiety and depression because some of my questions might shift their thinking on the church. Go ahead, Kayla.
I think in this thought bubble, like not only does it create a lack of critical thinking on our end, but it also keeps us from connecting and opening ourselves up to like experiences that others have had and gaining more sympathy or empathy for them, and not just being like oh well, if you came back to church this would fix that, but it instead, I've gotten to this point where I can just look at someone and hear their story and say thank you for sharing that. Like it's just
Right.
Thank you for allowing me to learn about your experience, because it's so much different than I am, and I might not have ever had the opportunity to hear that or feel that, or and obviously I can't live someone else's life, but I think that is huge in our humanity, is connecting with other humans. And especially like in the Mormon church, we limit ourselves so much to this thought bubble, to not being able to connect with more people on the outside. And it's,
Right, well,
yeah.
And I want to, number one, give a shout out to Quinn for chiming in and giving us a thumbs up. Hey, Quinn, thanks so much for joining us today. I also want to say, that in my field, we call a lot of this thought stopping. And when we thought stop, we also emotion stop. And so when we're like, ooh, that's different than what I already believe, we get that little bit of dissonance and we're like, stop. I have to stop. I have to disengage. You're not connecting because you cannot turn off your thoughts without it affecting everything else, your emotions and everything else. And it interferes with connectivity in relationships. So this is, what you're talking about, Kayla, is very well established in our behavioral health model, where we talk about thought shifting, thought challenging, thought replacing, where instead of stopping it, we get curious and we collect data and we learn to sit with that dissonance, which is dissonance just means discomfort because the information coming in is a little bit different than what I already believed or thought. So we're like, hey, sit with that discomfort. Discomfort isn't bad. Now let's get curious and let's check in and let's try and challenge our bias and whatnot, and kind of use that scientific model of, does new data change my thoughts and my feelings on this? So Mason, I'm going to have you do your comment and then we'll go to the next slide just to make sure that we're not missing any of these questions. Go ahead.
Well, and we kind of talked about this when we did our cult series, but if you assign a motivation to the questioning, then you've controlled the questioning. And in this case, and Christianity tends to do this, and a lot of religions tend to do this, but Mormonism, the motivation behind the questions is Satan. If you have those questions and you entertain them, you've let Satan into your life. So there is no ability for you to critically think about them because you're letting some other bad influence into your life, which is, of course it's not true. But when you're in that mind, that thought process, you can't risk it. I can't question this stuff, that it feels icky. And anytime things feel icky, that's Satan, and you got to get Satan out. So I'm going to put the questions aside. I can't do that because I can't risk my eternal salvation, which is what that is. I cannot question anything because it affects my eternal salvation.
Right. I actually kind of joke around. So Alex, you can go ahead and give us our next slide if you'd like to. One of the things that I have said many times to my clients is that cognitive dissonance is the term we use, that, the clinical term in behavioral health and mental health and medical health. But in religion, cognitive dissonance is named Satan, Lucifer, or the devil. Because what cognitive dissonance is, hey, this is new. That's weird. My amygdala, my survival instinct goes, ooh, this is different than what you already think. It's data. It's just a, hey, this is different. And in religion, we say, oh, that's Satan. Shut it down. Don't think. Drive on. Spiritual bypass. Put everything at Jesus's feet. So cognitive dissonance in religion is called Satan. All right.
Yep. We've done this.
I think we already did this slide. Yep. Go to the next one. Yeah. And so again, we kind of talked about this. So like the word of wisdom, they don't talk about things like eating too much sugar, daily exercise, like in our word of wisdom, if you read it, we have like exercise, get up early, don't be lazy, eat healthy, blah, blah, blah. And then we have all the don'ts. Temple recommend only focuses on the don'ts.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and I just want to interject here. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, right? Because it's easier to track the don'ts than it is to track the do's. But it's the power that comes with it. It's the fact that if you drink coffee, now your salvation is in my hands, right? It's the consequence that matters. Oh, you sniffed alcohol, right? Maybe you shouldn't take the sacrament for a week. Like, excuse me? And so you've taken somebody's salvation and you've placed it on very, very simple things that, granted, can cause problems, right? It's cliche how many people struggle with alcoholism and do bad things because of that, or cocaine or narcotics or whatever. But that's not the end result for most people. And we haven't given anybody the ability to to think for themselves,
Mhm.
because your salvation is dependent upon the fact that you don't drink coffee, that you
And
don't drink tea.
I would just like to add that I would prefer to poop in this life healthfully than go to Mormon heaven.
That is so selfish.
I'm
Sarah.
just
that is
saying,
so
like,
selfish.
pooping in this life sounds so much better than perpetually popping out babies and sharing my husband with millions of other women. Just wanted to add that. I do love that
That's
the church
selfish
checks.
too. That's selfish too.
Okay,
I
thank
want
you.
all those women in my life.
Oh,
One
well,
thing,
you can have them. I won't be there because I'm gonna be pooping. Go ahead,
No.
Kayla.
one thing I found interesting is like, as I've done studies within the scriptures, the Bible and all of that, a lot of the time, whenever there's been like a covenant created between a like prophet or anyone, it's normally between the individual and God. There's very few instances like in the law of Moses where a whole community has to follow the whole like commandment. And we're even taught in our church that like we have surpassed the law of Moses, that now like that is null and void now because of Christ's atonement. So it's interesting to me that we make these very strong statements of like a whole community having to follow covenants, and it's not on a more individual level in what we have seen more often than not in the Bible. But yeah, anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So real quick, for us, we can actually go just a little bit over because the way that Alex and I logged in, I have controls over
I've
the
got
StreamYard
power.
stuff.
Perfect.
So I don't want us to like rush through and miss some things. We still need to start wrapping things up. But our producer in the back is going to go and take care of his responsibilities and take care of himself. Absolutely love. I just want to point this out about my producer. I absolutely love that he honors his own self boundaries. It is one of my favorite things about having an employee that's like, hey, this says, I can be here for you up to this point, and then at this point, I have to go and do whatever it is. So, y'all, Alex, love you. Thank you so much for being here with us. I know you're behind the scenes and nobody can see you. You're amazing. And thank you for having healthy boundaries. And thank you to everybody here that can honor those for you. And I just want to like shout that out. Hey, people out there, you can do this too.
He just wanted to know, can you scroll the slides?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe
All right.
that I can scroll the slides. Yes, I can. I can do
Okay.
everything. The only thing that I am missing, Alex, is the end credits. So when we cut out our live stream, maybe I'll do a little song like dun dun dun, and then we'll end. And then in the audio later, Alex can add it back in. All right. So we may not end with as much beauty and grace.
Now I cannot wait for the end. Oh my gosh, I'm like on the edge of my seat.
Great. So I absolutely love that point, Kayla, that you're bringing up here. So thank you so much for that thought. Sorry, I kind of did that in.
Another
Please, yeah,
thing about it though too is that a lot of the time, when it was with an individual, it was perhaps permanent for that individual, but for a group, it was temporary. And so it was not like something that people were forced to live their whole life through, especially if it was something very hard to live. So I just find
I'm
really
just a little
interesting.
lost. What is, you said it?
Covenants, either personal or with a group.
If there was like a covenant that like they had to live, so like say like Samson, he was never supposed to cut his hair. But actually the people in his community, they may have had to like live that cutting hair thing, but it wasn't a permanent requirement for everybody. It was only on Samson that he not cut his hair.
Right.
And so in those kinds of individual versus community based things, a lot of the time there's a lot more leeway for the community to not have to live a covenant their whole life long.
Right.
And so it's just interesting to me to now look at where we're at in this in our own day and age and that everybody is forced to have to live a lifestyle that maybe might not be conducive to that individual.
You can buy Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, anywhere books are sold, including Audible.
What if you could have a career where the opportunities are as vast as our nation, where it's not about mission statements, but a shared mission? At U.S. Customs and Border Protection, we go beyond to protect more than borders, from ship to shore, air to ground. Cities to local communities, CBP agents and officers are keeping people safe. Join U.S. Customs and Border Protection and go beyond for something far greater than yourself. Learn more at cbp.gov/careers.
Right, and I'm actually going to go backwards here a couple. You know, on the very last point on this slide is, do you support anything contrary to the church? I mean, this talks about, you know, you guys have kind of brought in like an LGBT plus pin. Like for us, it's been like the issues of race in the church, because we have 2 kiddos that are Black, and then we have 1 kiddo that is Hispanic, and we have 1 kiddo that's Samoan. So we've got some brown kiddos in our family. And so, you know, the teachings here of the churches, you know, you were cursed with a darker skin, you weren't delightsome or desirable to the righteous white people, kind of a thing. That's a really huge problem for us. And so, you know, as you're kind of talking about these community things, there's a lot of things that don't necessarily, you know, like, my family of origin was not really concerned about the 1978 policy because we were all European whites. So it didn't hurt us. And now that I have children in my home that policy is really problematic for, it hurts my family, and I become aware of it. And so it's this, you know, I can't support anything contrary. And, you know, I love that in Jordan, your guys' outline, you're talking about, you know, the LGBTQ population. You're talking about other churches that maybe have some really great things going on that really match some of the things that I'm concerned about. You know, one of the things I love about and I'm going to butcher their name, the Unitarian something. And I know they're the Unitarians, where it's kind of like anybody from any denomination can come in. One of the things I absolutely love about what they do as part of their curriculum is healthy sex ed and healthy sexual boundaries. Like, they're not teaching not ever having sex. What is the word for that, Mason? Abstinence. Thank you. They're not teaching abstinence. They're teaching healthy sexual boundaries. They're talking about consent. They're talking about medical health and safety. I love that. And I had one of my kiddos go to that, and apparently that was problematic. And so this is, you know, one of the concerns that I have, that I kind of felt like we in a hurry skipped over. And then, as we come right here, we talk about what's important for your community, because that Unitarian sex ed class, not appropriate for my, you know,
individual
6-year-old and my 8-year-old. Not yet.
Yeah. Like, there should be more ability to opt out.
Right. And this is also where it's like, you know, the prophet feels, you know, the prophet of God started talking about vaccines and vaccinating for COVID, and you got to do this. And I had somebody, I don't remember who I was talking to, who said, you know, one of my issues with the whole vaccine thing, I can't remember who that was. It was you guys or somebody else, says, you know, that when you look at the SEC scandal, the church owns a shit ton of stock in big pharma. So you've got a prophet saying everybody go get vaccinated, and that actually helps the church's stock grow. And he did that as a prophet of God platform. And yes, there's a lot of debate and controversy about vaccinations, you know, and being in the medical field. Mason and I have vaccinated our children against COVID. Like, that was a personal choice. Yes, vaccines have eradicated some diseases, but I know that not everybody believes and feels that way. And so we're talking about things like I've had this revelation. I feel like it's what's best for me. But then we have that overreach of, because it's what's best for me, I'm just assuming it's also what's best for everybody else. And that's what makes it so dangerous. And I think that's what really hurt the LGBT population with the 2015 policy that Nelson kind of snuck in and then canceled again later, was, in his opinion, that was the best thing. And then when we had that cascade of suicides of our LGBT teenagers, specifically in highly populated LDS communities, and then lawsuits and whatnot came from that, it then they were like, oh, let's just take it away. And like Mason said earlier, they kind of do that silent. So it's kind of like, I think this is a great idea, therefore it's a commandment for all of you.
Yeah.
And that's very problematic.
Well, and just to give a quick thing, the 1978 policy that you mentioned, that was that blacks could not have the priesthood. And then the
changing that so that they could have the priesthood.
Yes.
Right.
And the 2015 policy was that children of an LGBTQ couple could not get baptized until they were 18. Just to clarify.
And they had to publicly declare that
they were against their parents.
That they were against their parents' lifestyle, that they felt their parents were wrong and sinful. The other thing with the 1978 policy is that blacks were also not allowed to participate in the same covenants inside the temple because they couldn't have the priesthood. You have to have men have to have the priesthood in order to go in.
Yes.
And so none of those could be done. So you could get baptized, and that's where it stopped. So I want to make sure it's not just the priesthood ban. There was also a temple ban. And Joseph Smith said that black people could be sealed and that they would be eternal servants in heaven. So according to Joseph Smith, we still had slavery in heaven. It was like, well, welcome to this beautiful place of rest where you get to serve all the white people forever and always. So definitely
lucky you for being
there.
born that way.
Right. One of the things, though, that I do like about the Mormon, and this is something I love about the Mormon temple stuff, is, are you honoring your obligations to your children financially from an ex, relationship? I actually like that question. Not necessarily because if you're not, you shouldn't get to heaven, but kind of that, are you being accountable to children? Like, it's so weird in Mormonism how in some ways they honor children, and in others they just don't.
Well, and I think if you look back at these questions, if you take them just at face value, most of what you're being asked about is decent stuff, maybe even good for you as a person, like being honest or being chaste even, or living up to the values that you've covenanted to. Those aren't necessarily bad things, but the problem is the way the interview goes about, or the control that it gives to a religious organization. It doesn't give the control to you. It takes your control from you.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. All right. I moved forward. Do you guys want me to go back for any of these?
Actually, for number 6, sorry, we didn't talk about that, but I think that they actually changed 6, which is, you follow the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ in your private and public behavior with members of your family and others. I feel like the old question used to be, is there anything concerning or something like that going on in your home? Like, I don't remember the exact wording, but that's kind of how I remember it.
Is there anything in your relationship with the members of your family that is not in accordance with the teachings of the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Yeah.
Mason, your memory as a former bishop is amazing.
I might have made,
to me.
A couple words are off, but that was the gist of that question. Is there anything in your relationship with your family that is not in accordance with the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Yeah. Which is an interesting question, and interesting that they changed it too. Because now I feel like actually it makes it so that you can basically look at 6 and kind of be more broad in what you define as that. And how I used to look at it was like abuse, like straight up, like, is there abuse going on in your family? So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's changed it for anybody else, but that's kind of how it's
for me. This one was really hard because my parents used the teachings of the church regarding chastity as their justification for abusing me as a 16-year-old. Like, it was, we are holding Sarah captive in our home to make sure that she never has sex before she gets married ever again. We are dragging her into the police station and making her confess about ditching classes in high school in order for her to be punished so that she does not have access. Oh, and even though she ditched classes, we're not letting her even go to high school in order to ensure that she never crosses this boundary ever again. And for more information on that, you can read my book on how that all went down. And so one of the things that was really interesting for me is that if you took my dad and my mom into a Temple Recommend interview and you asked them, hey, are you mistreating your family? My parents would have said, no, we're actually doing amazing because we are forcing Sarah to be righteous and never make another mistake like this in her entire life. So
there's a lot of
ironic.
There's a lot of room in these questions for that extremism. We've talked about that before. What is it about the system that has created a situation in which you can move to extremism? Look at these questions. There's a lot of room to move towards extremism.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit ironic. Just two thoughts here. I think it's a little ironic that the church, one of the main teachings of the plan of salvation is that God rejected the plan of Satan to force people to follow the commandments. And here we are, people forcing, your parents forcing you to there's no option to not choose to follow the commandments there. And that's been an extreme thing lately in the news as well, with Jody Hildebrandt and a bunch of other Mormon therapists that are getting into these major issues, and they're actually tearing families apart.
And even like conversion therapy was still legal in the state of Utah until recently. So this is like where we are literally torturing. We're like waterboarding and shocking the LGBT population in order to ungayify or unlesbianify them.
Like a BYU sanctioned thing that they had.
It was. Yeah, it was BYU sanctioned. And anybody who understands basic neuroscience, which most of us do now in our field, like that is part of our course of study, would look at that and say, we're not going to use trauma to treat anything because all it does is it creates
more trauma.
Right. The brain cannot learn new things. The brain can't shift. And so, it's pretty common knowledge that conversion therapy is completely unethical and not appropriate. And yet the church, they will send people to these things because it was still legal in Utah until recently. And it's so abusive. It's just awful stuff. And then, it drives me insane.
Well, there's so much about that that's not okay. It does have precursors like electroshock therapy, which actually does help with things like depression. But yeah, there's so much about them that they're kind of similar in the way that they're administered, but they're so different in what's actually going on.
They're actually not, Mason. Let me correct you. They are not similar at all. Electroconvulsive therapy is done under anesthesia so that you do not feel it, and electroconvulsive therapy targets a very specific area of your brain in order to reset like the synaptic process. Okay, that's a super oversimplification of that. Conversion therapy is more like the experiment where you give a shock, like you're being like a mild electrocution while somebody is conscious. So trigger alert for those who have either experienced this or on the LGBT population or pornography or sexual trauma here. So the way that conversion therapy works is that you take like a gay man, you show him some male pornography, and then as he gets aroused, you zap him with an electrical shock, and then you release the shock. And then when you give him, pornography that shows females, he's supposed to get aroused. And so you're literally playing with it. It is truly torture. This is not a, targeted thing like ECT in the old days, problematic. They have fine-tuned it. It's still really terrifying, but it's done under sedation. And it's not attached to behaviors.
I can discuss later what I meant by that.
Right.
You and I can discuss what I meant by that, because that's not what I was trying to say.
Okay.
But ultimately it comes down to it's not okay. Right. And that's, I think, that all we need to discuss that here. What they're doing is not okay. And so the rest of it's not important to this discussion.
Well, and that
and
they're
I-
so far behind the times
yeah.
in that
Yeah.
in medical science, we're like, whoa, this is not working. This is not appropriate. We do not have the evidence to support this. And the church is like, ignore all those people that have done the research. Let's keep doing this because being gay is so bad that we will go to any effort to correct it.
Well,
I'm
and
sorry,
let's-
Kayla, I kind of
let's
talked
talk
over you
about,
there.
like, why is this not okay? It's not okay because there is nothing inherently wrong with being in the LGBTQ. That is, I believe it's biological. I believe it's
Right.
it's not anything that is wrong. And two, like, there is no actual sex addiction does not exist. It's not in the like, what is it called, the official
DSM-5?
Yeah, it's not in the DSM-5 as an actual addiction. Like, so sex addiction does not exist. So when you're treating someone for being LGBTQ or for sex addiction or anything like that, like, those things, that is why it is wrong, because
Right.
these are not like they're not behavioral things that like need to be changed or need to be fixed or anything like that.
Right. Well, and
Giving me electroshock therapy to convince me that I shouldn't like Havarti cheese. I should only like cheddar or something like,
right. Right, exactly. Well, and I think, unfortunately, so many medical advances and our behavioral health advances are coming because of horrific, inhumane things that we thought might work in the past.
Yeah.
So the issue here is we have enough data to know that it's inhumane, it's horrific, it doesn't work. And yet we have a religion that is like, keep using it. And even funding legislation to keep it legal in their state. There was this whole thing that we listened to recently. Oh goodness, the Visions of Glory series on Mormon stories.
So good.
The current LDS therapist that is deciding whether or not your kid can go on a mission it's an ethical nightmare. And so yeah, that's so we're totally squirreling here. I don't think I can give you the squirrel thing because I don't even know where it is on here. So squirrel. Alrighty. So
Well,
let's talk about the sins and repent. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a follow-up statement?
No, I was just gonna say let's talk about that.
Uh-huh.
So regarding like sins and repentance, so this is really digging into the emotions of guilt that motivate people. So again, kind of going back to the story that I had and the story that Kayla had, like it's meant to guilt you into thinking of any possible way that you could have driven away the spirit, that you could not be worthy of God's love, of God's greatest blessings. It's meant to control you through your emotions. A lot of these questions control you through your emotions, but this one's particularly strong with that. And it's really broad as well. It's not just asking about one specific thing. It's like anything, so that people will be overly honest about what they have done, have felt.
Right. Define sin. What is sin? And in Mormonism, it is not obeying our rules, having bad thoughts. I mean, there's so many sins in Mormonism, whereas, like for me today, I would say something that is evil. I wouldn't even call it sin. I would say something evil is when a person intentionally and knowingly causes harm to other people. For me, that's evil. For me, that's kind of the line for sin. So a lot of this is, how does the individual person interpret what sin is and why we need to repent? Go ahead, Mace.
Let me clarify this real quick, because I put it up here simply. But the question itself is, have there been any sins that need to be resolved with priesthood authority that haven't been? So it's not just a blanket. Are there any sins in your life that you haven't dealt with? It's meant to be for the specific things. But the issue, like you brought up, kind of the guilt thing, is the issue is, in theory, everything that could keep you out of the temple, or everything that, if you haven't done, should have been done with the bishop, has already been covered in the questions that have been addressed already. So what is the purpose behind putting this in here if it's not to promote guilt and shame?
Right.
that's what it feels like. Maybe it's seen different for other people. That's what it feels like. Go ahead.
And
Kayla.
remember, it's also duplicated. So you get asked by your bishop, and then you get asked again by your stake president. And then also keep in mind a quote unquote serious sin in Mormonism is going to be like murder and then sexual sin. So this could be something like, hey, you got to tell me if you're masturbating, but you don't have to tell me if you're part of a Ponzi scheme. Tell me about if if you and your spouse are consensually swinging or in an open relationship, but you don't need to tell me if you're doing like tax fraud or tax evasion or, fraud. Like none of those are really what we're talking about here with serious sin. We're literally specifically referring to murder and sexual sin. So
Yeah.
according to Mormonism and blanket statement from Sarah, I don't believe masturbation is a sin. It's a healthy, natural, normal process that we should all be utilizing. And in my therapeutic room, we utilize therapeutically, not in the therapy room, of course, but we teach people, it's
I think that's an
okay.
important clarification.
Yes, we're not masturbating in Sarah's clinic. Thank God. That would be problematic. That's an ethical dilemma there. But what I mean is that part of like sexual rehabilitation therapy and, sexual connection within your relationships, we teach people to masturbate for healing and connection within their own relationship. Like not the specifics of how, but hey, this is an important part of healing. How do you, it's kind of like, where's your moral compass on this, on the issue of self-pleasuring, and then let me teach you how it can help or harm your relationship as we work through these goals.
And I think
hopefully I explained that better.
And it kind of moves just into that last question too. Everything that we've talked about. Well, do you consider yourself worthy? And I feel like oftentimes when I was giving those interviews as a bishop, I almost had to convince someone that they were worthy enough. Like it seems like it is meant to remind you once again just how much you need the church, how much you need Jesus in your life, how much what I have to give you, this little piece of paper, how important that is. And it just seems, it doesn't, frankly, if somebody tells me as a bishop now, if somebody were to tell me, I don't really feel worthy, I just said, you know what? By everything, is there something you haven't told me? Then by everything that's here, you're worthy to be in the temple. But if you're having issues of feeling worthy, maybe you need to go talk to someone that can help you work through those feelings that you have, because there's something going on there. And in this case, maybe it's the culture, maybe it's something that happened to you as a kid, maybe, who knows what it is. Now, what I would do is say, according to this interview, you're worthy to be in the temple. I want you to go talk to somebody that can help you work through those issues, whatever they are. But I wouldn't have done that as a bishop. I didn't know. I wouldn't have known better.
Well, and this really digs into that scrupulosity. If you're working with somebody who struggles with self-worth, self-confidence, trauma issues, where they've kind of always got that voice in the back of their head that they're not enough, that they're doing things wrong, like you're really exploiting vulnerability in this question, because it's usually pretty uncomfortable for a lot of people and struggle to be like, yes, I'm worthy, I'm enough, especially when you're in this huge environment of you're never enough. It doesn't matter what you do, you're not good enough. And so when you're feeding into some of those traumatic messages, this question can be very triggering and implode scrupulosity.
Yeah. Well, damn, Sarah, I feel like you just totally therapized me.
She's really good at that, by the way.
I just, this whole conversation, it's, I wanted to share. So this is a trigger warning for people who have suffered any sexual abuse or, but in college I was sexually assaulted. And I, for a long time, felt a lot of guilt about that, because not only was I a victim, but also I had engaged in breaking the law of chastity. And so for a long time, I felt like, because I was also taught that when we have fully repented of our sin, that sin will worry us no more, that we will not feel pain anymore, that we will not be reminded of it. It will be as if it never existed. And so every time I was triggered in my life, like hearing about this sexual, sin, or being asked this question or whatever, I felt pain, I felt trauma, I felt old things come up. And there were other like instances in my life, same thing, where it was like I still felt guilt over how I reacted or engaged in this situation or whatever. So had I really repented from it, if I'm still feeling the sin, or if I'm still feeling the pain and the trauma from it. And so exactly everything that you said, like that was that's a really hard question for me to hear and to deal with, because like even now, I still feel a little like trigger, but now luckily I've healed enough in my life, like going through therapy and going through these things, that I can, remember that situation and not feel like personally responsible for it and like guilt for it and everything. But my bishop would not have been able to really help me to work through that. And they also, I don't think, would realize like how much of a trigger that question could be for someone in that situation, and how much, like you said, with scrupulosity, that it brings it back to your mind again and again and again. And then you just, like you said, like I am that type of person that I never felt worthy enough for such and such. And so I got to the point in my interview questions where I could answer that and feel like good about it, and knew that was like the right way I needed to respond. But also, guess what? That was the right way that I needed to respond. So like saying, yeah, I am worthy, that was the right question to that answer. And so of course I wanted to be able to say that. But yeah, it's
can't put your salvation at risk, right? You gotta check the boxes. You gotta say the right thing. I have never even considered the fact that talking about repentance being almost a forgetting thing, right? Like if you've completely forgetted, or if you've completely repented, then you'll forget the sin, or it'll never bother you anymore. I've never even considered the idea of this situation where you feel guilty for what happened and you can't forget it. Well, duh. Like you got sexually assaulted, or you had a sexual experience. You know what? It takes a really crass person to forget even a positive sexual experience. So to talk about the fact that, well, you haven't forgotten this, so obviously you haven't repented all the way, is like so incredibly manipulative and trauma causing that. And I'm flabbergasted. I've never even thought of that, because in my life that hasn't been my experience. And so hearing that, I'm so grateful that you shared that, because I would never have even considered the idea that that someone would think, because I can't forget this event, I must not have repented all the way. And it actually it is making me emotional, because that is the exact opposite of what the idea of repentance is supposed to be. It is supposed to be healing. And so if you get some sort of wrong idea or teaching about the process, it is traumatic. And that that's it.
And I want to kind of, grow that a little bit. This just demonstrates, whoops, I'm playing with the controls here, trying to figure out, this is why I need Alex. Okay. The screen's completely on me. One of the things here that's struggling is the underlying concern here is that the victims are looking at how they managed their abuse, and it's considered sinful. Like, I feel like I have to repent from something that was not my choice, that I didn't have control over, and that it continues to come up. over and over and over again, because just as humanity, it's normal for us to blame ourselves when bad things happen to us. And with these interviews and with the push for sexual sin is the fault of the female. Men can't control it. Men can't control their thoughts, those types of things. We're really perpetuating, blaming the victim. And it's not okay. It's not okay that you don't, Kayla, you have absolutely nothing to repent of, because you didn't sin. I remember, for me, and when it came to like things with my dad, I didn't necessarily, so I felt like I had to repent because there was consensual sex when I was 16, but I felt like I was sinning when I wasn't meeting my father's expectations or needs. Like, I was obviously not, quote unquote, honoring my mother and father. And anytime I made a mistake, anytime I wasn't the best at something, love was withdrawn. And then I have this teaching of a Father in heaven who cannot look upon sin with the least degree of allowance without whipping Jesus. And we kind of talked about this earlier. And so my earthly father is going to withdraw himself from me when I don't do it the way he wants me to. And then my heavenly father is going to withdraw his love and attention from me when I don't do it the way he wants me to. And then my big brother, Jesus, is getting whipped and harmed and bleeding from every pore because of the sins that he already knew I was going to commit. So there's nothing I can do to do better. And for me, that turned into, I'm going to be enough for this God that can't tolerate sin. And to do that, I'm going to make sure that my kids are always loved. And then, fast forward, and I love my children, and I would never do it different, in the sense of I would have the same children. I think, like, knowing who I am, I cannot watch a child suffer and not just love them. And that's just part of who I am. But I would have done it with the intention of, I am giving of myself so that they know they are loved and they can heal, rather than I am making sure that my special needs children who struggle, who are embarrassing in public at times, you guys all saw cute little Abby here wave at everybody. If you're on the live stream, you saw Abby come in when she's not supposed to and wave at y'all. That little girl has fought every step of her life to be loved and accepted as part of a community, because she's got some severe special needs that make it difficult for her. And instead of just loving her because she needed it and because that brings me joy and peace, I was doing it to be good enough for my Father in heaven, as kind of this, look, if I can love these, difficult children that are hard to place, if I can do that, maybe I will finally be enough for a father in my life to not withdraw his love from me. And when we go to the, these interviews, and I'm being judged by a man with no training and no real insight into the context and intricacies of my personal struggles, and he gets to decide whether or not I am good enough to enter the temple, which is the only way in Mormonism that I'm going to be able to stay with this family that I'm literally sacrificing and giving my life to as their mother. It's such an unhealthy dynamic, and it shifts my motivation for loving and healing the most important people in my life to doing it to please the God in the sky who is insatiable. It doesn't matter what I do. I can never be enough for him, just like in The Good Place. Yeah. If I'm trying to eat organically, but my organic tomato came from a place of child labor that I didn't even know about, I'm going to be punished for it, Mm-hmm. And so it's never enough. And the person who's supposed to love me and advocate for me gets hurt before he opens his mouth. For me, it's a flawed system. I hate it. And these recommended interviews support it.
Yeah.
It supports the emotional abuse. And unfortunately, when you're caught in that system, you see this as a wonderful, beautiful, good thing. And it is not. It is harmful. So does anybody have anything else that they would like to say before we close out today?
I just kind of wanted to sum that up into my thought that I had while you were speaking, Sarah, and say like, wow, in a religion that really honors a work-based environment to prove ourselves worthy, wow, it's really hard to ever meet any expectations when it's impossible to meet them. And we're told that even after all we do, it's never going to be enough. It's always the atonement that has to come in and take over that. And I do just want to say that my own view has shifted, that I personally, in my own relationship with Jesus, feel that I do not have to prove my worthiness, because it absolutely negates the atonement and what Christ already did for us. I feel like in some ways it kind of spits on his atonement when we're told that we have to prove ourselves to be worthy.
Right. When our salvation becomes transactional.
Yes.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think the Temple Recommend interview just enforces that, or enforces and reinforces the fact that God's love is transactional in nature. It depends on how good you are, if you get to be loved or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it also reinforces the model of control that is exerted on your life through, again, behavior, emotions, thoughts, and information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For me, it, like, if I was to completely sum it up, the Temple Recommend interview is a way of benevolently, there we go, benevolently perpetrating, or benevolent, oh my goodness, my words, y'all, this is terrible.
It's obvious you're not supposed to say this. I mean,
Right. It is benevolent, perpetual inadequacy. I think my mic went out there, so I'll say it again. Benevolent, perpetual inadequacy. We are in a system that's supposed to be loving and wonderful and whatnot. We are basically saying, we love you so much, and this is so beautiful, and this will bring you so much happiness, because you are never enough, no matter what. And this system makes sure that if you check the boxes, God will always love you and want to be with you. And that's just, it's so harmful.
Mm-hmm.
and if you're not happy, it's your fault. It's not the
Yes.
system's fault. If you're not happy, there's something going on in your life. It couldn't possibly be the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Alrighty. Well, we went really long today, but I think that the conversation that we had is so meaningful. We've had, as I've watched the numbers of people who have tuned in today for the live show, they've been, up and down and whatnot. And so I'm really looking forward. Alex is going to be putting a lot of this into shorts and making it user friendly and whatnot for people to come and go as they need to. But I feel like we covered a lot of really important material today. We kind of went into lots of different things and what these questions can perpetuate, and really reinforced how much we focus on the temple is the ideal. You have to get there. And I want to say that in Mormonism, nobody passes into the temple without going through this process. And that a long time ago when I was a Mormon, I thought that this process was amazing, to make sure that everybody that went there were able to bring the Spirit with them, because they'd done enough. And since then, I'm here to say that the most spiritual places I've ever been are walking in the hallways of a jail or prison, sitting with people struggling with addiction, and being imperfect with people that we love, discussing vulnerability in a safe way, and in a safe environment with a safe person, free of judgment. And so what the temple is supposed to heal, what these interview questions are supposed to be doing, are perpetuating harm. And the way to heal and learn and grow and self-improve and become who you really want to be are found in the moments of true struggle, true empathy, and understanding with absolutely no judgment and no price to enter. And I just wanted to end there with that. So thank you so much, Kayla and Jordan, for joining us again today. It has once again been a huge pleasure to have you here with us. For our listeners, if you were with us live or you're listening later, please share this to your social media pages. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. We love interacting with our audience, and we will see you next time.
Growing your business can mean big-time logistical questions, like how are we going to keep up with all these local deliveries? Let Uber Direct offer you a helping hand. With Uber Direct, you take orders on your website, app, or by phone. Then, drivers who are part of Uber's courier network pick them up from your store and deliver them to your customer's doorstep. Sounds simple, right? Delivery just got better with Uber Direct. Learn more at uberdirect.com.